It is a great pleasure to have all of you join us today. Today is our second in this Hot Topics in PPP series that MCDF is organizing. And as always, we have a fantastic set of panelists that are bringing from very different perspectives, many years of experience on the topic that we are going to discuss today. And the topic is how to set up project preparation facilities that allow countries and PPP units or other agencies to have the resources to prepare high quality PPP transactions. And high quality, which is an important part of MCDF's mission, is to say, how do you actually prepare the procurement the documents? How do you make them with enough environmental, social, and governance dimensions? How to make sure that the legal aspects are strong, everything that is related to the PPP transaction. And many countries struggle to find those resources, and many countries try to figure out where to get those. And at the beginning, by not having those resources readily available, those transactions get delayed. And every year that you delay those transactions is a year of delayed benefits for communities, for municipalities, for infrastructure service users in that process. So today we are going to have an overview presentation from the World Bank, and then a fantastic group of panelists that are going to bring their perspectives and their experiences with very specific cases of PPP project preparation facilities. So without further ado, let me introduce Mikel Tejada Ibanez from the World Bank. He's with the World Bank Infrastructure Finance PPPs and Guarantees Global Practice. And Mikel's work focuses on infrastructure governance and regulation, and on issues of fiscal commitments and contingent liabilities of PPPs. He also works on the Benchmark Infrastructure Development Initiative at the World Bank. Before joining the World Bank, he was with the Inter-American Development Bank and their Fiscal and Municipal Management Division. And before, he was a practicing attorney in Spain, focused on public and administrative law. And Mikel is going to be talking about a study that the World Bank recently completed on a global overview of PPP project preparation facilities with several cases, practical lessons, and an excellent summary that will give us a little bit of a brief overview of the topic. With that, Mikel, we're all yours. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, and hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Mikel Tejada. I'm a PPP specialist at the World Bank PPP Group, and I've been invited here. I'm very happy to be here to present the work that we have conducted in the last few months. We started receiving requests from clients to support them with the establishment of project development facilities or project development funds. And as a consequence of that, we figured we thought that it was important to gather the experience that we had seen happen, right? So we conducted this study that I'm gonna base my presentation on, and that I believe you have been given access, or you will be given access, and my presentation does have the link to all the details. But I will go on my presentation and make a brief overview of what the results of the study are. I'm going to try to, of course, keep it short, because the most important part here is also to hear from our colleagues, our panelists, on their practical experiences on different countries. But I'm going to try to, I'm going to break down my presentation on the next few sections. I'm going to do a brief introduction of why do we need project development funds. Then I'm going to discuss the motivations and experience on project development funds. And then I'm going to focus on a few design features for project development funds that our study highlights: the structure of project development funds, funding for project development funds, as well as other considerations, particularly operational considerations. And I will finish with a few lessons for practitioners that come out from our study. So PPPs, of course, can unlock private investment for infrastructure, but well-prepared projects are lacking. So we all know that annual infrastructure investment needs exceed the available public resources. With this in mind, private financing, including through public-private partnerships, can help to close this infrastructure investment gap. However, what we notice, and it's quite clear, is that there is a lack of resources to prepare PPPs, and that is a key constraint faced by many PPP programs to develop a sound portfolio. As a consequence, directing adequate resources to support project preparation is critical for the success of PPP programs. Given this situation, governments are increasingly considering options to systematically support project preparation. Project development funds can be seen as dedicated vehicles specifically established to support PPP project preparation. And the ones that we have studied in our work are those that are frequently funded by the government, but may also receive funding from development partners or even the private sector, and are those that are mostly controlled by the government, which allows these PDFs, these vehicles, to support government policy towards the development of PPPs and address the specific project preparation challenges within a particular country. And they're often seen as a signal of political commitment to PPP programs as well. Important to notice that PDFs require deliberate design and management to be successful, and a wide range of issues from legal status to governance and sustainability need to be considered prior to their implementation. What are the key motivations and experience that we have seen throughout our study? So why do countries consider establishing a PDF? PDF are often focused on both allocating funding for project preparation and also improving the quality and efficiency of project preparation. Common motivations for the establishment of PDFs include increased capacity for project preparation. Project development funds can support oversight of transaction advisors and the transmission of capacity from PPP unit to contracting authorities. Encouraging the use of PPPs. By providing dedicated funds for the preparation of PPPs, PDFs incentivize contracting authorities to consider PPPs as the alternative, as the procurement alternative. And finally, they also can support hiring qualified advisors. They can be designed to overcome procurement obstacles and retain very good quality advisors, improving the efficiency of the preparation of PPPs. From what we have seen on the experience, PDFs are often established in countries that have already a reasonable degree of PPP experience and capacity, and who want to increase or broaden their PPP program. They are embarking on other reforms to improve the PPP enabling environment, and they're also implementing other PPP funding and financing support mechanisms. How have PDFs contributed to PPP program success based on our review of experiences? So they have helped for sure, of course, building PPP pipelines. PDFs have directed significant funding to PPP project preparation. In the Philippines, they have supported 45 projects, and in Mexico, they have supported across over almost 80 projects. They also help improve project bankability, because the higher quality of project preparation leads to more PPPs reaching financial close. And that's the case, for example, that you would see in Indonesia, with nearly half of the projects that have reached financial close having received PDF support, or in India, where a series of PPP interventions have quadrupled the PPP investment from 2006 to 2012. They also finally drive PPP policy, because they encourage contracting authorities to consider PPPs, and with that they have supported the growth of the PPP program. So important to note is that the success of project development funds do not occur in a vacuum, and they're not a silver bullet. Their success is frequently tied to a broader government support for and commitment to the PPP program. What do PDFs support? So PDFs primarily focus on the preparation and transaction advisory facilities, but some PDFs support other activities such as capacity building and even project implementation and contract management. On this figure that I'm not going to go into the details, you see the different areas of the PPP project cycle and the different key points like the selection of the project, the preparation and structuring, and the decision to proceed to tender, and the final approval. And in each of these areas, a PDF may have a role, but the core role is usually the one that focus on a structured tender and tender award process, which is a traditional advisory role. And it's usually the point of entry is following the pre-feasibility study when there is already a sense that the project has the suitability as a PPP. But given the importance of project identification and pre-feasibility, some PDFs also consider support projects further upstream before their pre-feasibility. Now let me go to a few of the design features that we highlight in our report. First of all, PDF structure. So the PPP frameworks usually underpin the PDF structure. PDFs are typically established within and alongside the PPP enabling environment, and this drives the PDF structural characteristics. Three areas to discuss. Establishment vehicle. Most PDFs are established via the country PPP legal framework. This is the case in Ghana, Kenya, and the Philippines. The location of the project development fund, they're typically located also within existing institutions responsible for the PPP program. This can be either the PPP unit itself, and we will discuss a bit more the synergies between project development funds and PPP units afterwards, or also the Ministry of Finance. And governance, they're usually are typically governed by an independent committee that is whose composition is very similar usually to that of the committee that may govern the overall PPP program. Other examples specifically exist, particularly on those countries that do not have a specific PPP framework or a specific PPP law. They may choose different vehicles, as in the case of Onadin, where the project development facility is set on a trust fund governed by a wider range of stakeholders. Again, continuing on PDF structure, on the structure of these vehicles, let's say that functionality requirements usually drive their structure. The legal structures vary considerably, but they are typically focused on enable the functionality necessary to fund PPP advisory services. What do PDFs need to do, and therefore what structure they require to fulfill these functions? They need to hold funds over a longer period of time than the typical budget cycle. Project preparation activities sometimes go beyond the typical budgetary cycle, and therefore it's important that they can hold these funds and distribute these funds across several years to succeed on their purpose. They need to effectively procure and retain high quality advisors, and for which is challenging sometimes under the public procurement rules. So that's another characteristic that will have to drive their structure. And they may need to receive and retain fund reflows, particularly if we introduce a revolving feature on the PDF, which we will discuss briefly afterwards. Usually, to achieve all these functions, a separate entity is necessary, but in some cases, entities that are not separated have been established as well. Finalizing with PDF structure, one thing that we have noticed is that project development funds are generally managed by existing institutions. And this is what I'm going to discuss, what I was commenting before of the synergies between project development funds and PPPs. PPP units and PPP units. PPP units are commonly leveraged to deliver PDF functions. And this model has a number of benefits. It leverages care capacity because you use the capacity of PPP unit as an effective way of building PDF capacity, and allows the PDF to benefit from the existing relationship between PPP unit and contracting authorities. It becomes a one-stop shop. Creating a single point of contact can make it easier for contracting authorities to navigate the development of PPPs. And for example, in Indonesia, the PPP unit manages the access to the PDF as well as other government support mechanisms for PPPs. And traction and engagement, managing the PDF is also beneficial to PPP units because it provides them with an incentive for contracting authorities to use the PPPs as procurement alternative. Another institution that is popular managing PDF or some of the PDF functions are local development and financial institutions that sometimes are outsourced some of the functions of the PDF. Moving on to another area of the same feature, which is referring to project development funding and its sources and its requirements. What we have noticed on the countries, on the project development funds that we have studied, is that the government budget allocations are still the primary source of funding for most PDFs. So that implies that PDFs do not generally or completely relieve the burden of funding project preparation, but they create a vehicle with systematic project preparation funds that is important to overcome that lack of funding, right? Because that said, there are other sources of funding that can be used. One is developmental partners that can be provided to PDFs and also private financing. But private financing for project development funds is quite rare, given the high-risk activity of feasibility studies and the type of activities that PDF do. So it may be only possible in very highly developed markets. That said, even though most of the funding may still come from the government, it's important to understand that PDFs do not require a large upfront capitalization and may have established with less than $20 million as the initial finding. This will depend on the volume of projects that the PDF is expected to support. Also on how early the PDF engages in project preparation process. Of course, more funding will be required if activities further upstream on the project cycle have to be funded. And also in the ability to rely on continued funding allocation year by year. On another area regarding project development funding, and this is an area that I already mentioned and that is very commonly discussed in terms of project development funds, is the possibility of adding a revolving feature to a project development fund. This is something very widely discussed, and it's true that project development funds can be designed with a revolving mechanism to support this fiscal sustainability of the project development fund. These are usually success fees or reimbursement requirement, but despite them being widely discussed, they have not been that widely used. And the reason for that is that they, on the one hand, require very clear legal enabling provisions for them to work, and sometimes they may be perceived as weakening the demand from the contracting authorities to the PDF, since part of the cost of project preparation will have to be reimbursed. Well, where they have been implemented, there is only limited evidence that this type of revolving features can fully support the financial sustainability of a project development fund. Success fees, that is the most cited, the most common approach, are often less than 50% of what the PDF requires to continue operation. And this is because not all projects that are studied will be actually reaching financial close, and that's by design. When you prepare a project, you may have to accept that some of those projects will not reach financial close because they will not be structured as bankable projects. And even with reimbursement requirements, if projects do not success, it can be complicated to recover those funds. That said, revolving features merit consideration because they can stretch scarce project preparation funding, and which is an important feature in the context of the fiscal constraints faced by many governments, and they support increased ownership from contracting authorities by ensuring that they do have a skin on the game when they receive project development funds from the facility. In the Philippines is an example on which some revolving features have been implemented, and it's a case of it's an interesting case to consider. Finally, on design features, other considerations, mostly on operational issues. So for the project development fund to be successful and to successfully support the development of a robust PPP program, there will be a need to drive demand for project development funding support. So this will require taking steps to engage with contracting authorities and encourage the demand for PDF services, which includes often issuing guidelines and supporting contracting authorities to identify eligible projects. It is also key to discuss and consider the procurement of advisors, because selecting high quality advisors is the core function, and it's something on which the PDF will participate directly, and there are challenges to be faced. The empowerment of advisors, of the preselection of advisors, may be a key tool to identify qualified advisors and expedite procurement timelines. And finally, implementation arrangements will be important. The development of agreements which clearly allocate project and advisor management responsibilities between the contracting authorities and the project development fund will be essential. And these agreements must enable the project development fund to ensure effective project preparation while respecting also the contracting authorities' ownership of the project. Across all these aspects of operations, project development funds should adopt a demand-led approach by thinking of contracting authorities as clients and making their requirements as a key concern of the operation of project development funds. To finalize, and then we can move to questions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. A few lessons from practitioners that are extracted from our study. So there is no right project development fund design, only a PDF design which best support project preparation in a particular jurisdiction. 5 issues that we can consider. We need to ensure that the PPP enabling environment is sufficiently well developed to support appropriate preparation and implementation of PPP projects. It is important to define the PDF role within the project preparation landscape early on the PDF design. Project development funding strategies should be realistic and consistent with the overall objectives of the PDF. The PDF structure should be defined based on how to best enable the functionality of the vehicle on the particular jurisdiction. And finally, as I just mentioned, PDF must be user-focused and able to evolve over time to stay relevant. With that, those are the key highlights that I wanted to present on today's presentation. But of course, all the details on which this presentation are based are available on the full report that goes over each and every one of these areas that I have discussed briefly. I think, Victoria, they will share the presentation, so you have the presentation with a few of the details if I was running a bit fast on some of those details. But also, please go ahead and download this report and have a look at, because there is a lot of content there that, of course, I couldn't present in this. And with that, I turn it over to you all, and happy to answer any questions that the audience may have.
Mikel, thank you very much for that presentation, and congratulations on the report. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of interest in reading the details of what you have done. This global overview of good practices is precisely what the PPP practitioners need. Now, there are a few questions that I want to ask to follow up on the conversation. Now, as you were looking at the different PPFs, how is the use of funds? Is it all housed within the PPP unit, and the PPP unit handles it and therefore does all the procurement and the disbursement of funds? Or are there cases where those funds are transferred to the line agency that is going to be leading the PPP? What have you observed in terms of funding of the flow of funds?
So what we have observed mostly is that, or one of the ways it works is the project development fund is mostly a facility to hold the funds, and then there is a set of arrangements in between the project development fund and the contracting authorities, by which the contracting authorities actually do receive the funds and may actually do themselves the actual procurement of the advisors, but with the participation of the project development fund. So the project development fund is mostly a bucket of resources designed to systematically fund project preparation. And that's a bit what I was mentioning on those operational issues. You have to define very clearly what the allocation of responsibilities between each of the parties are. And that's in relationship of the PDF with the contracting authorities that are kind of their clients. They apply for funds, they receive funds, they use those funds to prepare projects. But of course, they do have the oversight of the project development fund, and that's where you may get the increased quality on project preparation. And on the case of the PPP unit, it's not that you necessarily have the project development fund. The project development fund may be a different legal entity or be an independent account, but you may leverage the staff of the PPP unit to manage the PDF functions, right? So some of the staff may participate on the application review, or the PPP unit may sort of act as this one-stop shop. So the contracting authorities don't have to worry whether there is one or two entities. They go to the PPP unit, and the PPP unit it can channel them through the right process, right? So more or less, that's what we find.
And what type of governance arrangements have you seen? Is it all like a committee chaired by the Ministry of Finance, or how does it work, the administration and the oversight of these PDFs?
So I think there is different, and we've seen, like, we've reviewed 8 or 9 cases, and there is different models. So there is not just one single model, but I think a very common model is one on which you have sort of like a oversight committee or high-level committee that is more of a decision maker, a strategic decision maker, and then what you will call a project development fund manager, which may be one person or a set of people, or maybe that function is allocated to the PPP unit as the project development fund manager. So those two layers that differentiate between the more strategic decision-making process and the more administrative process, right? So the committee, the strategic committee will eventually be the one who approves the allocation of funding, but through the processes that are performed by the fund manager, who's the one who drives the operation of the PDF.
Excellent. I want to also inquire a little bit about the sources of funding for these PPFs, because you mentioned that the majority are really funded by the government, that they find value in putting money into such a mechanism to not only speed up project preparation, but also to increase the quality of the advisors and the quality of the overall transaction. But are there any other sources of funding that you saw that come into this process? Are, for example, the IFIs coming and help? Are donors putting money? Any other sources of funding beyond the central government?
Yes. So and that's a key question, right? And that's also one of the key issues that we look into, because we were very interested, right? We a lot of the requests that we got in the last few years on regarding PDFs was because governments are, of course, looking for ways of establishing vehicles that they can attract other sources of funding beyond that of government. So we look into that issue, but we see that on the PDFs that have been operational for quite a while and that have been quite successful, the reality, despite all the discussion on attracting other sources of funding, is that most of the funding still comes from the government, right? And that's something that comes out as a finding from our study. It's not like it's what we want or we don't want. It's like it's a fact, right? And we want to mention that. So we demystify the idea that you can completely sort of like you're going to establish a PDF and you're going to attract external funding, and then you're going to be out of the challenge of having funding for it. I think PDFs still help, because by forcing the government to systematically allocate that funding on a vehicle, it ensures that funding is available, not on an ad hoc basis, but on a more systematic way. That's one way they help. But it is true that some PDFs have been able to attract funding from donors, bilateral donors, and also from donors like international financial institutions. Now, that funding comes with some strings attached and some requirements, and that sometimes complicate or make it more complex to attract that funding, right? So it's not that it's not possible, and it may be something that, of course, we haven't seen so much. We look at project development facilities that were established, that had some track record and that they have been working for a bit, but it's maybe something that is going to move forward, and more maybe other donors and international financial institutions will be putting some resources on this type of vehicle. So it is possible. It has its own challenges, and of course at that point the government has to start to, well, we were talking about the steering committee and the project development fund manager. As long as the funds are fundamentally from the government has full control of it. The moment you start attracting donors or either bilateral or international financial institutions, you have to also start considering their own requirements, right? And sometimes when that happens, you may have to have a sort of a third layer governance, which is sort of a donor conference, for example, on which you have them all together, and then you will have to align the different incentives of the donor community, right? So of course there is alternatives. There is ways of creating windows within PDFs where you can devote some of the funding, but it does add a layer of complexity, and countries have to consider whether that layer of complexity is actually worth it or
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, you mentioned briefly that actually there's a lot of talk about using success fees, but in the reality it tends to be a little bit different because it's more complicated. There's not enough closure, or the credit agent, the implementing agencies get all concerned about the rules of that success fee. Out of the cases that you have seen and in your general experience, how common is this? You would say that a quarter of the PPS work with success fee, 10% of them. Give us a sense of how frequent have you seen success fees not only being talked about, but actually being implemented?
So it's a very, again, very valid question, very important issue. One of the issues we conducted this study, and for sure go on there is a whole chapter on this on the report, and you can see all the details. When we started this study, that was one of the things about PDFs, right? Like the possibility of having a revolving feature that will make a PDF financially sustainable in the medium long term was one of the sexiest things to say. And we do believe, based on our study, that there is merits to consider that. But our study also wanted to sort of bring reality to the table and make clear that it's very unlikely that just by using a revolving feature you will have full financial sustainability, right? And what we have seen, as I mentioned, the one case in which the revolving feature is working quite well is in the Philippines, and I encourage you to go and look at those details. In other countries, many countries start the design of their PDFs with the objective of having a revolving feature. But in several cases, those revolving features were never fully implemented, or after they were implemented, they were discontinued because they were not actually working that well, right? And part of the issue is
1 out of your 8 cases only came up with a workable model in that process.
So the Philippines is the best case, yeah. Excellent. The Philippines is the best case of those, and again,
Now, can you say a few things about the Mexico case? Because Fonadin is not a PPP unit or a PPP in that process. It's a different mechanism. It's like a national infrastructure bank in that way. Can you say a few words of how does that operate? Because it'll be interesting for the audience to see a second model, a trust fund in a way, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, the case of Fonadin is a bit different, and it's one of the outliers of the cases that we look at. But we thought it was interesting to be look at precisely because it has different features, right? It was established, and most of the functions. But part of what I mentioned also is differently from other countries that have very clear institutional arrangements from PPPs. Mexico does not have a strictly speaking a PPP unit. The PPP unit's functions are divided within other institutions, the Ministry of Finance, Investment Unit, and other institutions. And therefore, that's why probably Fonadin is more of a trust fund on which many of the functions of the PDF manager have been attributed to Banobras, which is the local developmental investment fund. In fact, there is other cases closer to Fonadin, and we haven't studied those in detail, but we do discuss those on our report a bit on the side, but we didn't thought they were strictly part of the scope of the study. And those are like the DFIs in many countries do have project preparation funds for their own projects, right? But that is not strictly speaking preparing PPP projects. So we didn't cover those in detail. In the case of Fonadin, they do PPP project preparation, strictly speaking, but they are indeed different in the sense that instead of being more embedded within the PPP framework, those functions are mostly done by Banobras, right? So it is a trust fund, and it is managed by Banobras. Again, different PDFs have different features.
Yeah, different models in that process. Mikel, thank you very much, not only for the presentation, but for answering all these questions. I see in the chat room lots of interest for the report, just to let everybody know that we will be distributing the presentation and the report and access to the video recording in case you want to see some of these again or you want to share with your colleagues.